everyone. Thank you so much for watching today. I am here with the CEO of JMark, Thomas Douglas, and we are going to be talking about the new era of security. So we talk about this internally all the time. What was done 2 years ago just does not cut it anymore today. And every time I hear Tom speak on this, I learn more. So I'm really excited. We were just talking about how we have seen a huge, insane increase in the number of cyber attacks happening. They have actually literally doubled as of November 2020. So very scary stuff. So Tom, let's just start with what kinds of things are going on in the world in this area that everyone needs to know about?
Yeah, great questions and scary topics for sure. The short version is that the number of attacks against small businesses have just doubled, and that includes phishing attacks, the types of malware that are out in the wild, the websites that you can happen upon that will infect your computer, and then the for real hacks, the people just trying to find a way to breach a network through vulnerabilities that may exist. Those vulnerabilities could be in a firewall, they could be in a server that's public facing. There's lots of ways for the bad guys to find their way in. They can do something as simple as finding a way to get malware on a workstation, on a laptop while you're sitting in a coffee shop, and then sit on it for a period of time or let it be in kind of a quiet mode until you enter back into the network. And then once you're on the main network, then the software goes crazy and starts to propagate throughout the entire organization. So there's dozens and dozens of ways that the bad guys can get in. Literally, there's over 300,000 versions of malware that is being released in the wild every single day. So the number of threats against the small business is well into the billions and is going to continue to grow for this foreseeable future. So the challenge for the small business owner is to figure out, what's the appropriate things to do, what's the appropriate amount of money to spend in an environment to properly protect the network and have the right plans.
And what's your answer to that? What does this mean for a small business? What actions do they need to put in place?
Well, I mean, you alluded to it at the very beginning, and that is that the shifts that have occurred in the bad actors, the hackers, what they're doing have resulted in an environment where we have to change the technology that we have inside the network. And antivirus and firewalls just don't cut it anymore. An organization needs to have active monitoring in the environment, needs to bring in professionals to do a security assessment of their environment. So that we know what's going on. Are the passwords set up properly? Do we have two-factor authentication set in place? Are we protecting the endpoints from going to bad places on the internet, even when they're not connected to the core network? Are we firewalling them? And things like the XDR software, which is kind of a new version of antivirus software, if you will, that doesn't just look for bad software, for patterns, if you will. It looks for behaviors on the network. So if a piece of software starts to do something that acts wonky or acts inappropriate on the network, it flags it as bad software and essentially creates the alert. The active monitoring, though, is really the thing that's necessary in today's world. So we've engaged with an organization that is a security operations center that operates 24/7, 7 days a week. And their whole job is to take all the logs, all the activities that are going on the network, to compare those and aggregate them, correlate them to make sure that they're seeing the full picture. And once they do, they can raise the hand essentially if they see anything occurring with eyeballs on glass, people looking at screens all day long, making sure that things aren't happening. And the reality of it is, you can't get everything. There's going to be some things that occur inside an organization, whether it's a user clicking on an email or somebody bringing something into the network that we don't want in there. And so the big thing that we have to plan for is, well, then what? When it happens, how do we mitigate it? How do we minimize it? And then how do we have the right response plan in place to ensure that it doesn't bring the network to its knees, it doesn't wipe out all of our data, it doesn't result into a major security incident where we have to pay millions of dollars for remediation and notification services.
Mm-hmm. And this might be a little bit what you're talking about, but I wanted to talk specifically about a business continuity plan. Like we
Yeah.
have talked about how it's changed. Like it used to need to include X, Y, and Z, and now it needs to include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
That's correct. Yeah, you're exactly right. The business continuity plan was primarily focused on technology failure, server crashed, and we need to recover, something along those lines. The disaster recovery, the building burning down, things like that. But now it needs to encompass all the scenarios associated with security. So what happens when ransomware happens in the network, and what a lot of people don't know about this whole world is it's an ecosystem. The bad guys aren't, guys sitting in their basements drinking Mountain Dew and trying to hack on the network. These are full-blown businesses that operate overseas. A lot of them are state actors funded by Russia and funded by China and other organizations or other countries that are intentionally trying to attack the United States, and they have incentive plans, they have HR departments, they go to work just like we do in our jobs, and their whole purpose is to compromise businesses in the United States. And so they're patient, and that's the scary thing. They get inside of a network and they don't just go crazy. They'll sit and they watch and they learn how the business operates. They'll try to log passwords and they'll try to figure out how organizations back up their data. And then they'll wait until the most inopportune time. So 2:00 in the morning on a Friday evening, Saturday morning is when they're going to launch it, because they figure that everybody's tired from the week and they've busted their butts and they're ready for the weekend, and they're starting to kind of relax a little bit, sleeping at 2:00 in the morning, and then they delete all the backups that they can find, and they launch the ransomware into the environment with the intention of shutting that business down to the point where they have no choice but to pay the ransom. And you're seeing all kinds of crazy things since November of last year, where the state actors are increasing their attacks, and the ransom and the true hacking organizations that are seeking the ransoms are increasing theirs as well, largely because of things like the Bitcoin going up in value, and where they would have had $100,000 in the bank and the Bitcoin 10x, now they've got $1 million in the bank, and they're literally investing that, because for every $100,000 they put into R&D and hacking, they get $500,000 in ransomware payments. So it's a real business that's driving really bad behavior.
That was one of the most shocking things that I've learned since being at JMark, is that it is not a weird guy in a basement anymore. It is a full-on company just like we are.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people still don't understand that. And so now that they're becoming aware of that by listening to this, I think that a lot of people are probably thinking, how could I possibly win? How can I compete with that? What would you say?
Yeah, it's really, really tough. And there's a series of things that we just have to do. We've talked about how we have to really build up the security posture. We have to put new tools in place, but it's just as important to think about the what if. So the business continuity plan, and walking through all of those scenarios. So we get into things like RPO, so recovery point objective. So how long do I want to go without taking a backup? And then recovery time, how long does it need to take before my business is up and operational if I decide to execute in that business continuity plan? So can I stand to be down for 1 hour, 1 day, 2 days, 7 days? Those are all decisions that have budgets and technology tied to them to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of an organization with the technology that supports it. So if we know that in a particular business we can't be down for more than an hour, there is a lot higher end piece of technology that we have to put in place in order to facilitate that in the event of a breach or any other kind of an event. But if it's okay for us maybe to lose 4 hours or be down for a day because we can navigate through old methods or paper methods for a day, then there's obviously a lower cost associated with that. But those decisions can't be made by an IT department. It needs to be made by a business owner. It needs to be made by a board of directors, because these decisions can have huge financial ramifications. Done improperly, they can shut a business down for 7 days, 14 days, or they can lose 100% of their data. If we don't take a copy of all of that information that's so important to run the business and take it offline, make it immutable, which means if they delete all the backups, we still have a copy that wasn't connected to the network that they can't delete, so that we can bring that back into the network and restore it when we need to. If we're not putting those kinds of things in place, it would be no surprise at all if the business didn't survive and had to shut down.
I can definitely picture a business leader hearing all this and saying like, I don't need to worry about that. That's for a bigger company.
Mhm.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, sorry, but they're after you. And almost 50% of the attacks that are going on in today's world are against the small business. 28% of businesses, small businesses in America have actually already had a breach or an incident of some kind. And I would argue that, and that's a serious issue, I would argue that 100% of small businesses have already had malware and viruses and those things. And the scary part is those pieces of software sometimes will sit dormant for days, weeks, months, or even over a year before the bad guys decide to exploit it and do something about it. So even if you had an incident a year ago, if you didn't do the right job of cleaning it up, which was just a virus, that can fire back up and shut down a small business. And the hard part is the small business oftentimes doesn't have as much safety in it as a big company. You take $1 million out of a small business, it can easily shut it down. You take $1 million out of a big business, it's got a better chance of surviving. So the likelihood that it's going to have a negative impact on that small organization is much more substantial.
Something else I've learned too is that the employees are the biggest risk. I think that you could speak a lot to that and educate.
Yeah, 100%. The number one way the bad guys are getting in still is through phishing attacks. And their goal is to get the employees of an organization to fall prey to some sort of a prank, social engineer, if you will. So it could be clicking on something that takes them to a bad website, to download something, or even wiring money or buying gift cards inside of an organization because the email came from the CEO who had just happened to be on vacation or happened to be away at an event and nobody was talking to him and didn't know any better. We've seen situations where know of situations that right here in Springfield, Missouri, there are bad actors who hang out at bars and they learn the social networks and they figure out when CEOs are gone on vacation or on a trip so they can mimic an email from the CEO into a CFO or a controller of an organization and wire out hundreds of thousands of dollars. You think that all went away in the Cold War, but the reality of it is it didn't. It's still happening in today's world, and they're using that as a means to compromise an environment. So training the employees, getting to the truth, making sure that everyone inside the organization recognizes that they're the target, and then talking about security on a very regular basis is just the minimum right to play in today's world.
So something I'm hearing now too, I could just hear a business leader listening to this and saying like, okay, that's all fine and good, but that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of time that I do not have.
Yep.
What would you say to them?
Bring in a professional. If you try to fight this on your own, there's a reason that most businesses don't have an attorney on staff or have a CPA on staff. And it's the same in technology in today's world. You need to lean on a professional organization to come in to help build a technology plan, to build the strategy, to walk through these scenarios for you and figure out what the appropriate amount of your budget is to spend on this, because you can overspend. And so it takes a good, honest, ethical company to come in and work with an organization to figure out what the appropriate amount of spend is and to roll out these initiatives and technologies to ensure that your organization is properly protected. Don't try to do it on your own.
I like what you said about finding like an honest, ethical company, because this is an area where so many people are so in the dark that a company could come in and tell them anything they want, and all they can do is say, okay.
Yeah, they would have no idea.
Yep.
You've got to spend the time to vet the technology partners to figure out what's right and what's not, and then balance that against your own budget. And there are companies absolutely taking advantage of organizations right now. It's sad but true. So make sure you're taking the time to vet your technology partners and get to know them, find out how they operate, why they operate, and what their motivations are.
So we've covered a lot, and this is truly an endless topic. So I think my last question is, I just want to ask, like, what should I have asked you? Like, what's the one thing that you want people to walk away with today?
Well, I would say this, that the threat is so substantial that they need to stop, drop, and roll. Like most organizations just are not still giving this the amount of time and energy that they need to. There's the distractions of COVID, there's revenue that's off, there's many businesses that have lots of other competing priorities inside of an organization. the reality of it is there's nothing more important than this inside of an organization other than keeping the doors open and taking care of your people. There's nothing more important than taking care of the technology, because done right and done wrong means the difference between your business surviving and your business not. And if businesses don't take that seriously, they're not going to make it.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.